Hello and welcome to another SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So, in this episode, I'm continuing my Star Trek journey, starting a little bit of a new here, in discussing the 1994 science fiction movie Star Trek Generations, which marks the 7th theatrical outing for the Star Trek franchise, and now actually sees the cast of the Star Trek Next Generation TV series take over the motion picture mantle in their motion picture debut. So, the film was directed by David Carson, who I believe was actually a veteran director of the Next Generation TV series, and it also features music composed by Dennis McCarthy, who is also a veteran of the TV series. As a disclaimer, I may give some spoilers for this film and others in the Star Trek series, and so please do switch off now if you don't want to hear any plot details for the films in this series. Please do come back though, please. Let me know what you thought of the film when you come back, finish off the review, and obviously the other ones in this series. But yes, by all means, it's spoilers, so switch off now if you need to. The film actually starts in 2293 with the launch of the new Enterprise B, following the decommissioning of the Enterprise A in the last movie, The Undiscovered Country. We catch up with Kirk, as played by William Shatner, Zulu, as played by Walter Keong, and Scotty, as played by James Doohan, from the original series cast, now with kind of them in the retirement and performing ceremonial duties, basically, aboard the Enterprise, as its press-laden maiden voyage gets underway with its new captain, Captain John Harriman, as played by Alan Ruck, who, to be fair, seems rather inexperienced and a little bit of a wet lettuce, if you ask me. Well, compared to Kirk. Disaster strikes, however, when two ships are found in distress, caught in some kind of energy ribbon. One ship is destroyed before the Enterprise can actually assist with the survivors, but some of the survivors are actually beamed aboard from the second ship only moments before it is actually destroyed. Unfortunately, the Enterprise also gets caught in the ribbon, and although they do manage to set it free again, this isn't before Kirk is blown right out into space, following a burst of energy from the ribbon, which kind of rips through the engineering decks of the Enterprise. So, we then zip forward to 2371, where we catch up with the crew of the Enterprise D, as we have known them from the Next Generation TV series, including, of course, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, as played by Patrick Stewart, his first officer, Commander William T. Riker, as played by Jonathan Frakes, Lieutenant Commander Data, as played by Brent Spinder, Chief Medical Officer, Commander Beverly Crusher, as played by Gates McFadden, there's a few, Commander Deanna Troi, as played by Marina Sirtis, Commander Georgie LaForge, as played by LeVar Burton, and, of course, Lieutenant Commander Worf, as played by Michael Dorn. If I got any of those names wrong or mispronounced, please forgive me. It ain't my strong suit. So, there you go. So, the crew of the Enterprise happens across an observatory which has been attacked by Romulans. It is here that they meet a scientist by the name of Zoran, as played by Malcolm McDowell, who, unbeknownst to them, is kind of plotting a series of sinister experiments which will result in the loss of millions of lives. As it turns out, the energy ribbon that attacked the Enterprise B is actually a kind of sort of gateway to a temporal nexus, if you like, that enables you to experience ultimate joy. Time has no meaning, and you can relive and recreate any memory or feeling that you wish. A sort of euphoric utopia, shall we say. And Zoran will stop at nothing to return there after being pulled out, as it would turn out, by the Enterprise B, as one of the survivors of the ill-fated craft we saw at the beginning of the movie. So, the race is then on for Captain Picard and his crew in order to stop Zoran with his plans, which will cause the needless and mindless slaughter of millions of innocents in his selfish and blinded mission to get back to the Nexus. In doing so, Picard enters the Nexus and finds none other than Kirk himself, who also got trapped in there when the engineering section of the Enterprise was destroyed. Ultimately, their efforts are hindered somewhat by the antics of the Next Generation series regulars, the devious and despicable Klingons, the Duras sisters, as played by Barbara March and Gwyneth Walsh, who are looking to bring the Klingon Empire back into glory with a new weapon devised by Zoran, which, of course, he only manufactured for his own end goal. So, enough of the rambling. The movie starts with so much promise. I mean, you know, with a plot like that, you would be forgiven in thinking this was action-packed, you know, on the edge of your seat real kind of stuff. Well, unfortunately, although the film has some very interesting ideas and a crossover event that fans had kind of been waiting for since you know, goodness knows when, and although, as stated, it does start off with a real sense of adventure and into the unknown, it simply just doesn't follow through, and kind of becomes quite flat as it goes on, never really making much out of the story, the tools and the actors that it had at its disposal. It's just simply not as grand as you might expect. From what I remember, I think that when this was actually released, it actually did very well. But for me, it's nowhere near the strongest entry from the Next Generation team. And for me, it isn't even the strongest Star Trek film at all. It is quite slow, and I really don't think the characters translated onto the screen as well as they could have done. The film does have some redeeming features, don't get me wrong. I mean, at its heart, it is a fairly good sci-fi film, and it does try to emulate the Next Generation TV series. In that, I mean, it probably does feel like it could have been an episode of the series. It even has the kind of classic narration by Picard that we find so much in the series. However, there was just much better episodes in the series and a lot more base material that they could have drawn upon, which may have translated onto the bigger screen in a much more coherent way. But again, it is great to see the Next Generation crew on the big screen, and obviously now with hindsight, it's exciting to think about how, you know, where they then took this motion picture franchise next. For me, it's always going to be the film in which Captain Kirk was killed. I know that was part of the plot all along, but if I'm honest, for me, it just seemed unceremonious and lackluster in the way that they actually carry it out. I'm not saying that I wanted fireworks and a grand procession, but it was just kind of cast off like yesterday's news, buried on a random planet in an unmarked grave. Not the way I think even he might have imagined it. Just didn't feel right to me. You know, oh well. But the film does feature two Enterprises, the Enterprise B and the Enterprise D, each as stunning as each other. Well, if I'm honest, the Enterprise D perhaps a little more, well, okay, a lot more than the Enterprise B, with some great shots of each throughout, along with the classic Klingon bird of prey. The cinematography is something the film does actually exceedingly well, and you have no complaints from me with respect to that. Although, overall, one scene does particularly stand out for the Enterprise D. As impressive as it is, it's also heartbreaking to watch. You'll know the one I mean if you have watched the film, or when you do get around to watching it, so I won't say much more for that. To be fair, it's actually the Nexus, for me, which is the most confusing part of this film. It was certainly a very intriguing concept, a doorway through which your imaginations can run wild. You can be whatever you want to be, go wherever or whenever you want. But in the movie, there was very little about the Nexus that's actually explained. It's almost as if the filmmakers themselves couldn't quite understand the concept. So they ended up answering the questions about the energy ribbon by simply not asking questions in the first place, and simply ignoring core plot points. And in my opinion, that would have perhaps made the concept a smoother transition into the world of Trek for those who were really not familiar with the show. What makes it even more confusing for me is that the inclusion of Guinan, as played by Whoopi Goldberg, into the overall story arc. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, it was great to see Whoopi return with the Next Generation team, and something I felt was kind of perhaps missing in the later entries as she was quite a regular member of the cast in the TV series. And it also kind of felt like she was part of the Enterprise and part of a grander, bigger plan. It would have been really good to see more of this in Generations, but again, it's hinted at, but never really takes off. The confusing bit for me was that it is shown that Guinan was rescued back in 2293 by Kirk and the team along with Zoran. Both Guinan and Zoran are Elorians, but no further mention is made to their ancestry or what it actually means to be an Elorian. We know that Guinan has been around for a very long time and is quite wise in the matters of the Borg and Q, but nothing in relation to any others in her race. Guinan tries to explain the principles of the Nexus to Picard. Now, he seems to understand, but I must say, I didn't. You never truly know what's real and what's not. Whether or not you can truly travel in time or not, and how on earth Picard actually ends up leaving the Nexus at all. Yeah, I mean, it is all a little bit odd, to say the least. And in saying that, I'm ranting a little bit, but whatever happened to the original Picard when the current Picard goes back in time to stop Zoran? Surely this would have resulted in two Picards? Again, the film simply ignores these issues, making this foray into the time travel very complicated and messy, to say the least. Anywho, I think I have been ranting a bit, so you can probably sense my frustration at this film. So, let's get back to the good stuff. One thing I love is the role that Data has in the movie. You do get to see all of the Next Generation cast, some perhaps more than others, but the standout comedy role has to go to Data, who is battling his emotions after trying out a new emotion chip. Data is, of course, an android who strives to be more human, and emotions have kind of always been something he has longed to discover, and oh boy, in this film, he certainly does. Overall, deep down, it has some real good sci-fi elements, and it is clear that it does try to be more than it is. So you do kind of have to give it credit for that. Finally, the music. You will find no grand Star Trek entrance here. There are threads of familiar themes from a number of the TV series, including the original series, Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Not wholly surprising, given that the music was composed, like I said, by Dennis McCarthy, who, as stated earlier, had worked on the music for themes for a number of the TV series. Unfortunately, just like the film, the soundtrack simply falls flat and is fairly dull in comparison to the soundtracks presented for the previous Star Trek releases. So, overall then, not the greatest entry into the Star Trek movie series, but it is still worth a watch, even if it is just to see Picard and Kirk on the big screen together. Okay, so the plot is fairly weak and a little confusing at times. Not exactly the most fitting end for either the Captain Kirk or the Enterprise B, but I must admit that it does contain quite a bit more action than I remembered from the first few times I saw it. But you do have to kind of sit what feels like quite a while before it actually gets there to that point. And then it's only in dribs and drabs. To be fair, it could have been fast-forwarded about 20 minutes or so, and I probably wouldn't have noticed the difference. So, now that that's over with, that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it, and please do leave a like if you have. Please do hit that subscribe button if you want to see more movie reviews, trailer reactions, other movie-related content. We'd love to have you back. Please do come back. But otherwise, all I can say is thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.